So welcome, and thank you for listening or watching the Focus Forward Business Podcast. I'm Sturdy McKee, business coach and advisor, and your host. I'm very happy today to have Dr. Garner here, Dr. Ginger Garner, with us on the Focus Forward Business Podcast. Dr. Garner is based in North Carolina and is a physical therapist, a certified athletic trainer, professional yoga therapist, and is board certified in lifestyle medicine. She's also the CEO and founder of the Living Well Institute, which educates providers on the root causes of disease, pain, and disability so they can better help their patients. And she is also the owner of EudeMOMia, private practice physical therapy clinic in Greensboro. Thank you very much for being here, Dr. Garner.
Thanks for having me, Sturdy. I appreciate it.
I hope I got everything right there.
Yeah, it is. As entrepreneurs go, we have lots of interests and lots of balls in the air, and for me, it's a good balance.
Cool, very, very good. So, will you please tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I think if I start with what my original, kind of what lit my fire originally to do this is a deep curiosity to understand how things work under the surface. So, when I went to PT school, I was only in PT school not even a year before I was questioning why there wasn't any health promotion, prevention, public health education. And that was in the mid-90s. And I was just frankly told that's not what PTs do, period. And that burst my bubble. So I went to my advisor in the department, who I just revere. She's wonderful. And she said, don't pay any attention to that. We'll get you into the School of Public Health. Obviously, we have nothing to offer in the way of health promotion, in PT. So hopefully you'll change that. So I went to the School of Public Health and kept my place in PT school. And that kind of informed every decision I made since then. So I guess at heart, I'm an advocate for people to have access to a well-rounded, holistic model of healthcare, which also then turns me into an activist, really, because an advocate would talk about it, maybe volunteer a little bit, but the activist gets out and pounds the pavement a little bit. So that actually, drove me to run for public office a few years ago, because I do believe that everybody has a basic right to affordable, accessible healthcare that treats everyone fairly and equally. So then by training, I guess that's my heart story.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah.
The more dry, academic, boring side would be, yes, so I finished my degree, although at some points I thought about quitting PT. I already had my license in athletic training prior to that, because I needed to pick something that seemed to be a good kind of segue, into PT. So exercise science, physiology, all of that was intriguing to me. I could be on the go and working with athletes and doing, emergency based sports medicine. And all that was thrilling, but PT was, my ultimate goal. So I got my degree in, athletic training and physical therapy. And then it didn't take too long before I realized that what I had learned to that point wasn't really helping me with my chronic pain patients, because I took a job in an underserved area that, unbeknownst to me, would become one of the major epicenters for the opioid crisis in the country. So all of a sudden I had all these people flooding my schedule in chronic pain. And I lived in a far-flung region, because it was underserved, in North Carolina, where there had never been a PT clinic, in particular areas of that county. We had one, that's it. And our county was 2.5 hours kind of wide. So it was big. Okay. So I knew that, for me, yoga was important personally for my own self-care, but it hadn't been something that, while I was in PT school, that I necessarily thought about where the rubber meets the road, really putting it into practice. So I started to do that, and patients began to get better. But I also realized that on the side, I was kind of moonlighting with like yoga teacher trainings and,
Mhm.
learning as much as I could. But I'd come back from trainings and go, okay, there was not a shred of evidence in what they were teaching. And I would spend a lot of my time doing pro bono, Good Samaritan, let me help you with your SI joint because you can't get off the floor because you're in so much pain, from what's happening here. So I ended up spending a lot of my time doing that and realizing that we needed something that bridged the gap between yoga
Mhm.
that was being taught in gyms and stuff all over the place, back in the 90s and earlier, and what I was doing and how I was using yoga. And I thought, certainly somebody is out there that has already started a program and I'd love to just get involved. And it turns
Mhm.
out there wasn't one. So
Okay.
that's where I started Living Well. And I operated as Professional Yoga Therapy Institute for 20 years before last year, until last year,
Mhm.
when the pandemic hit. I shifted everything that I was doing. My structure and my business, everything completely changed. And it became Living Well Institute because it needed to, for me, represent a larger section of society which may misunderstand yoga. Yoga's Me Too moment and its reckoning. And there's a lot of things that are still taught that are not safe with yoga. And yoga tends to be, in the past, guru based and driven,
Right.
and they had to come to terms with all of that. And I felt like the lifestyle medicine that I had been teaching patients and providers for 2 decades already was, for me, getting back to my heart story of why I got into this to begin with, have it be health promotion oriented and public health oriented, that I could reach a wider number of people in offering the yoga part, integrative medicine via yoga, but then the whole lifestyle model as well. So in a nutshell, that's my heart story and the more dry business side of the story. But that led me to get training in Ayurveda, Pilates, yoga therapy. I ended up writing my first book titled Medical Therapeutic Yoga as a way to bridge that gap between what was happening with yoga teachers and then what we were doing in healthcare, there's a big chasm in between, of what happens
Right.
there.
Right. Right. But
But
looking
day
at
to
that
day,
with a
yeah,
clinical lens.
right, right.
Yeah.
So yes, you could say as a result, I try to not take myself too seriously at all times. I find that to be a good philosophy and policy to have. So that's what makes medical therapeutic yoga as a textbook so darn dry and boring, because it's just the science. It's like, here's the pose, here's how to recalibrate it. Let's make it safe for the hip and the pelvis. I tend to focus on that a lot
Mhm.
because that's a vulnerable area, particularly in women's health, which is mostly what I see.
Mhm.
So that's the less, exciting part, is just focusing on the science. But for me, I see patients every day in my clinic and they get better. They've gotten better for 20 years using 20 plus years now using that more. It's more of a linear approach using, integrative and lifestyle medicine, but just those two terms cover a broad range of
Sure.
possible um, interventions, and treatments that I can offer.
So you kind of told us about your latest iteration of the business, but let's go back to the beginning. Why did you and how did you get started in your first business, and what was that?
In
Did you strike out on your own? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that, I think, is probably a story that is commonly shared amongst anyone who branches out on their own. I mean, it may resonate with you too, because I know I'm
Mhm.
not the only one to feel this way. When I took that job in an underserved area, um, like many, I had school loans. I needed to, work those off. I needed to put my head down and take that first job and get to work. And I did that. It wasn't too long, about 9 months into me working, because I had some forgivable loans also for working in an underserved area, that I could not take what was happening in the practice anymore. which was less about the holistic approach that I wanted, the health promotion, wellness approach, and more of a follow the protocol, follow the recipe, pack as many patients as you can in a day, and completely burn the therapist out, and maybe not even get the patient better at the same time. So I ended up quitting. I agreed to disagree with my first employer on many points, some of what I mentioned just now, and I left. I went promptly down to the other end of the county and offered myself up. Here I am to start a PT practice in an area that there had never been one. Once that happened, and I also was in a 12,000 square foot facility that was brand new at the time. I was teaching all kinds of stuff, all kinds of aerobics, yoga, Pilates, you name it. I was teaching all these health promotion and wellness classes, talking to the gym members about nutrition, and I was getting to practice PT. It was ideal, for a little while. So once I opened the practice on that end of the county for another facility, that got my feet wet in how that should look, how things should be run. And it wasn't too long before in that practice, the same thing happened. What you're doing is too specific. Yes, your patients are getting better, but if you're out, no one knows how to do this yoga thing you're doing with patients. And so I ended up striking out on my own after that, because it was follow the recipe. Doesn't matter if the patients get better, but churn out your 20 patients a day or get out. And I said, okay, I'll leave. I'm out.
Mhm.
So that's when I totally made the leap, which was not long after getting out of school, which was terrifying. And you had mentioned too, launching out, heading out on your
Yeah, I
own.
did that a little early too.
Yeah, not that far out of school was really daunting prospect,
Yeah.
especially having it happen in that way, where the area I was in, how do I put this? The area that I was in almost felt like a time warp, like it was 10, 20 years behind. So for me to come busting in there, and talk about wellness programs and health promotion programs in a PT practice, they were like, whoa. Same thing my PT school said 2 or 3 years ago, right?
Right.
Actually, that would have been like 4 years ago, when back in the mid 90s, when I said, hey, where's all the health promotion stuff? And they're like, what are you talking about? So I got the same attitude, from a very well loved and known and respected school, as well as in the two PT practices that I was working for. So that's kind of how I broke out on my own, because I had to. I didn't have a choice. So I started the first, gosh, I guess it was pretty early on then. There wasn't a whole lot of PTs opening yoga studios, and offering all of that in addition to, more progressive model of PT practice. But that's what I did.
Cool. Yeah, I think your story does resonate. That's a lot of people leave for those very same reasons or similar
Yeah.
reasons to kind of get
Yeah.
to an
I did
endpoint.
learn, something from them telling me, oh, what you're doing is, is working, but it's too high maintenance. We can't recreate it. That kind of saddled me with a second passion when I left to start the practice, which is to teach other healthcare providers how to do what I was doing,
Right.
because if my colleagues couldn't recreate, and that's a valid concern, that they can't recreate what I'm doing if I'm not there, then, well, I need to teach. And I've always loved to teach. So I started the Institute at the same time I started my private practice.
Okay.
I think entrepreneurs tend to do that a little bit.
Would you have done it any differently looking back?
I think that if I could talk to my younger self, I would have just looked myself square in the eye and said, believe in what you're doing. Because when you have everybody from all corners of the ring telling you can't, which had been the director of the PT school, it had been the owner of the first practice, it had been the owner of the second practice, all telling me I can't. And I think about half of me believed that. I'd say, no, stand your ground. stand your
Good.
ground.
Yeah, I don't know. The I can'ts make me more determined in some ways, just being stubborn. But
I think that's
anyway,
also a difference in the way, like the gender context and the way um, children can be raised.
sure.
Is that girls are often raised to just make everybody happy, just smooth it all over. Don't
Mhm.
rock the boat, you know? And if you do, you know, be ready for the
Well,
backlash, right? We see that in the press all the time. And that took me a while to figure out that some people, because you're assertive and you're a female, are just never going to like you. And that's okay.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna say it wasn't for lack of trying on my parents' part to get to get me to be more agreeable. But yeah, that was not something I ever gave up on, I guess.
I
Um,
think that's great that, you know, boys, when they're raised, or whether it is just encoded in them, tend to believe in what they're doing and they don't take no for an answer. And so it took me a while to kind of take on
that's good.
that courage and to actually believe that I could, since you know, social conditioning as a female would have you believe that you can't or you shouldn't.
Well, and as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you hear that from all sides. I mean, that regardless of background and how we were raised and stuff, we still hear that from everybody because it's something. If you're creating something that doesn't yet exist, people will tell you it can't be done until it's done, and then then they get behind you and tell you how remarkable that is, right? I mean, we see that all around us as
Yeah. And
well. But
the funny thing about it is that that point of pushback that you get and a
mhm.
final acceptance might be 20 years or maybe after you're dead.
How many
You
starving
know,
artists are right
right. When
created?
somebody says, "Oh,
Yeah.
I love what you're doing," you know, and they kind of view it as something that just is like overnight, like all of a sudden you have this whole program and
Yes.
you're doing it, you're making it happen. I'm like, yeah, it was like a 20-year overnight success.
That's that's yes. Scaling up. Vern Harnish mentions that. He quotes Steve Jobs saying it's amazing how many overnight successes happen after 20 years. So you're
I feel
definitely seen it.
encouraged by
Yeah,
that.
yeah. But it's surprising how, when you really look back on so many of these things that suddenly get adoption or turn a corner or are wildly successful, when you really dig, it wasn't, it was anything but overnight. It was decades of work, years of work on the part of people who
Yeah.
believed and kept getting told no. So no, I you know congratulate you, and I'm kind of in awe of it too. So awesome, awesome stuff. Um, so let's go to this one because a lot of business owners, kind of the same similar point of what you were just talking about. A lot of us, we're out there on our own. Um, they feel like they're alone. They feel like they're on an island, if you will. And that's one of the advantages I get to see behind the curtain. I know that everybody's struggling and dealing with different challenges. The only real question is what challenge today, how big is it going to be, what's coming down the pipe. But what challenges are you currently facing, and how are you planning and working on overcoming them?
I think to talk about what's current, we can't not include the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
As we were talking about that before, you know, the
Right.
podcast, of one of the first things that come to my mind, and I think this is the perpetual cultural conditioning and struggle that women are faced with, is um, when someone simply says, lean in, and I'm all for it. I'm ready. I'm leaning in. I'm doing it. But there's like 12 hurdles that I have to jump,
Right.
and that are not on, you know, like in the male perspective, like in their track lane, they just run, you know, they just go. In my track lane is, I had 3 kids. I was pregnant and gave birth 3 times while I was starting Living Well. I
Right.
opened my first practice while I was raising those kids. and doing living well. I wrote my first book. I went and got a doctorate all while I was raising them. And now they're 15, 13, and 9. So they're still far from grown. So I think when you throw in COVID and the pandemic, and then you realize, yeah, and then there's quarantine.
Right.
There's quarantine. And prior to the pandemic, most of the revenue that came into my business as an educator and as a practitioner came through in-person care and traveling. And it all went away overnight. So when you've got 3 kids to raise and fund, and boys, and girls, they're all expensive. And the non-binary, we're all expensive, all of us. But when, like I'm feeding 2 teenage boys, holy cow, like they eat, more. So the bills keep coming, and all of a sudden the revenue goes. Can't travel, can't necessarily see in person. And even if I am open, are people going to show up? So the pandemic threw everything that I thought I knew about running these 2 businesses into, disarray. Case in point, I was sitting here at this desk the second week in May, when the country started to shut down, when the world started to shut down. And we were trying to make a safety call we had to make a safety call several days before my live class was to occur. So it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday class. It was an extended weekend
training
class.
For clinical.
In person in California. I'm on the East Coast, got to go to the West Coast. Got to make, give people a wide berth to cancel airlines. And the airlines were starting to say, you can do that. You can cancel your flight and have no penalty and just move it. And so we had decided that at that time, because the nature of things kind of snowballed all of a sudden, people were already on their way. So we couldn't literally, when the country started to actually shut down, we couldn't change those plans. People were on their way. And so I got on the plane. We quarantined. We, did everything that we were supposed to do with precautions. And it ended up being a very lovely, kind of insulated from the world last continuing education course, where I think it was life altering for me. And I think it was for many, many people in the room. But on the way back, I knew things were shutting down. I knew things were going to change. And maybe for a very long time, we had no idea. And so on the flight back from California, where I did not get COVID, but I was flying out of a hot zone, to the time I landed, the wheels touched down in North Carolina, I devised a new plan for what I was going to do. And so I hit the ground literally running when I got back here to completely revamp websites. I shut my practice down and ended up doing it for nearly 3 months because I already had to quarantine from coming out of the hot zone. So things were, they were touch and go. But within weeks, things began to turn around. So I think that my greatest challenge right now is to figure out what's going to work for the future. I still think we have a giant question mark hanging over the pandemic. We don't know what's going to happen. So that leaves business owners who have operated in these more traditional models, scrambling for what we're going to do. And there's so much noise. There's so much noise online these days.
Yes, there is.
Right? Like I hope
so
someone
many arenas, but yes,
is helped by this podcast today, but we could just say it's all, it's all part of the noise. But we genuinely want to get through and help people. So I think that, yes, the pandemic, yes, homeschooling 3 kids while still trying to run a business. And you may have heard one of them just streak through the house shouting a second ago, but the struggle is real. That's where the mindfulness comes in. To keep ourselves organized, to use and manage our time efficiently, while knowing now we have to kind of quasi homeschool kids. And we lost a family member to COVID last month. It's just, things have been heavy and dark for a lot of people. So I'm trying to keep the hope and to kind of plan tight and run loose, in all this.
Well, I like that. So that's another common challenge a lot of people are dealing with is, being pulled in all directions, not necessarily not having enough time, but not knowing where to spend it or, manage it effectively. What tips or tricks do you have that have worked out for you to be able to maintain this and to juggle all the things that you have going on?
Well, take for example, I've had three super busy times in my life. Yes, when I was getting the company and the private practice started, and I
Sure.
had two kids in diapers and one with special needs and in urgent need of heart surgery. That's one really super,
Right.
critical time I think back to in my life. The second was when I was doing my doctorate, writing my book, still had my clinical practice, still running the CE company. And then I needed major hip surgery, and one of my sons was diagnosed with autism, like all at the same time. And then the third,
Jeez.
super busy part. That's why I try to keep a sense of humor about everything. Don't take yourself too seriously, Oscar Wilde said. I stick to that. The third is when I decided to run for state senate,
Mm-hmm.
maintain my continuing ed company and my teaching schedule, maintain my practice. And the
No
kids
run
were,
problems.
still little, right?
Right.
The strategies that I use to absolutely not just stay sane and survive, but to have a measure of a quality of life, because any one of those three scenarios can throw, you into a panic attack just thinking about everything you have
Sure.
to maintain. And then you're supposed to like maintain your self-care and fitness on top of all that other stuff. Like, WTH or whatever you want to, acronym you want to put in
My
there.
11-year-old says, well, that's fantastic.
That sounds like my 13-year-old. Yeah, that sarcasm well placed can be a good thing.
Yeah.
Is to not take on more than, and this is getting granular when I talk about time management and efficiency. Instead
Yeah.
of doing, I can talk about broad sweeping topics of efficiency and time management, organization, your infrastructure, clearly define what you're doing, which is important. Know who you're targeting, who are you trying to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you will commit yourself to all kinds of things and then you won't achieve any of your goals.
Right. Right.
I've been there. I understand it. I get it. So I do think those things are important, but they're not specific. So
Mm.
one of the most specific things that I would have someone think about with respect to time management is, after you've organized and after you've clearly defined what you're doing and after you have clearly defined your goals even, is to not take on any more than 3 major tasks a day, at an hour and a half each. So I take breaks in between those. I define my major 3 tasks for the day. I don't go beyond that. So I separate my clinic days out, my patient care days,
Mhm.
because that to me provides the integrity and the continued experience that I need to be able to teach CE, to be able to teach continuing education, is to keep my hands in practice. And the other thing I think people need to do in addition to chunking it out, scaffold
Mhm.
your work so that you can take it in bite-sized pieces. Because in addition to filming, I've filmed over 100 hours of new content since COVID, since March of last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in order to be able to do that, I need to know when I'm most productive,
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you can define when you're most productive, is it in the morning? Is it in the evening? That will do the most for you as an individual to help you work, to use a cliche, work smarter, not harder. I have a little mathematical equation that I use to determine how many units of productivity I'm going to engage in per week. And when I
Okay.
started using this mathematical model that chunks my time out into those hour and a half units, I actually went from being less productive and working as much as 12 hours a day
Mm-hmm.
to working 6 to 8 hours a day, and my productivity units nearly doubled. just from
Very cool.
understanding how to scaffold my time and to get up and get going in the morning, which I've always been a morning person. That's not a difficult thing. Not
Uh-huh.
saying everybody needs to be morning people, need to be
Right,
morning people.
right, right.
I gave birth to someone and he's a vampire. I'm sure of it. He does everything, productive at night. But that's what I would say. Whatever, there's other models for productivity and time management, but find a
Sure.
model, find what works. And I think that would really help people a lot, entrepreneurs a lot, don't think that you've got to put in 12 hours. You don't have to. You can. I did it for years,
Mhm.
thinking that busy is better, almost glorifying busy. Yes, I'm so busy. Well, who cares? Who cares? Especially,
Right.
when we have hundreds of thousands of people and people we love and our family members are dying. I don't really care how productive I am anymore. What I care about is connection. And
Mhm.
so I manage my schedule so that I can connect meaningfully with people and I don't miss any, you know, um, any of that time we have left. Because who was it that said you have less time than you think? Is it Confucius? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. I'll
Yeah,
have to look that one up. But
one of those wise people
yeah,
said
but
you have less time than you think. Might have even been, a Buddhist quote. I'm not sure, um, but I do believe in that. So
cool. Yeah, I love that. I think your point's incredibly well taken too, because the when we are working long hours, we're generally becoming less and less productive at some point in that time, right? So focusing on things that are going to get you the return is that's great advice, and then chunking the time. I love it. Thank you.
yeah,
Um,
and if someone has and this may sound so obvious, but to me early on it wasn't. That's how I ended up committing myself to a lot of things that never helped me reach my goal of
mhm,
connecting with people and helping people. Um, and that is to, if you're pressed financially and you're just getting started, you've got to focus on what's going to bring in the income, and bring in the revenue for you. And I think sometimes, especially in healing professions like physical therapy, we forget that.
mhm.
I remember taking my first job and going, I can't believe they pay me to do this. I don't even notice really the pay. It's really about loving how much how much I love what I'm doing.
Right.
And that became a big stumbling block and disservice to me. Especially again, to go back to the gender context of being a female, we're taught to nurture and caretake and don't worry about the money. The money will follow. Well, no, it won't.
Yes, yeah. I've been down that road too. Yes, take take care of the money side
You have
for sure.
to. Yeah, you
Yeah.
have to. And it it did not become important to me that I had that stability um, until I had children and
Until
wanted
kids, right,
to be able to provide for them. Until then, it was like, oh, I'll volunteer for this and I'll do that. Yep, I'll do
right.
that for free, no problem, whatever. And then it's like, well, I have to keep people alive, not just myself. I can live off oatmeal and carrots, but they need more than that.
Well, that's another great point. I did this when, you're having to have the tough conversations, you're having to say no to things, you have to really prioritize or figure out what's next. Um, I actually heard this from somebody else, but I did this. I put a picture of my family and kids right there facing me on the desk, and that was the reminder of every decision I make, I need to know whether that's good for them or not.
Yeah,
And that will get you to stop overcommitting to
it
things that aren't
does.
useful very, very quickly.
I
Yep,
have to
there you
show
go.
everybody this then. This is
Perfect.
what my youngest made for me like 3 years
Nice.
ago, and it's still in mint condition and a little bracelet. And here's their little,
Silhouette. I
their
love
little,
it.
yep, their little cameos, their little silhouettes.
Yeah.
And I keep that right there. It's important to me. And on the other side of my desk, I keep quotes that will continue to fuel my original passion and my heart story, which is, well, I have one right here on this side of my desk. Um, I have a whole stack of these quotes, big stack. Every time I read something that's really meaningful to me or that is profound to me, I write it down. And writing stuff down takes more time than typing. So you really
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
commit stuff, if you will write it down
Yeah.
to memory. You can commit it better to memory. So this is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from the Birmingham jail, which is a simple one. Injustice anywhere affects justice everywhere.
That's a great one.
And in healthcare, we are facing, if we can't see it now, then we're all blind, to see what kind of inequity
Yeah.
and unfairness and just sometimes complete negligence we have in the healthcare system, that people can't get what they need, or they go bankrupt over not being able to afford it. So this keeps me on the straight and narrow, keeps me
That's
accountable.
great. Yeah, and COVID's brought that into razor
Hmm.
sharp focus for so many.
Yeah.
You mentioned Confucius earlier. Another quote for the entrepreneurs and around the time management thing is the person who chases two rabbits catches neither. So so you focus on your goal, pursue the one goal, and listen to Kongzi, because that's
Yeah.
it. Cool. So
Yeah.
what you've given us so much already, but I'm going to ask you one more kind of big question here. What's the biggest thing you've learned more recently that you wish you had known 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I think we touched on it when we were
Mhm.
talking just before this podcast.
Mhm.
When I was in PT school, oh, I had rose-colored glasses on, this is great. Um, I went to one of the best PT schools in the country, and I felt proud of that. I got in, it was
Mhm.
so hard
Mhm.
to get in here. Um, Then I get in and I'm immediately disenchanted and disillusioned, and I'm thinking about quitting and like, why am I here? They're not teaching me what I thought. I was learning lots of great stuff, but it wasn't the piece that we know now to be probably more important than the curative side is prevention, you know, changing lifestyle choices, changing people's behaviors, really connecting with them. And so I wish that, because PT school didn't give us the opportunity of any marketing degree or any MBA or Masters of Public Health or anything. And a lot of PT schools do that now.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think then I wish I could have had more confidence to stay on that, like you mentioned, having that one goal, because that was always my one goal. And to pursue as much training like you have also in business. And like I've tried my best to pursue with public health and integrative, which is part of that's integrative and lifestyle medicine.
Mhm.
Um, I wish I would have pursued a little bit harder the notion of, getting that second degree in public health. So if you're out there, you're PT or, an entrepreneur, and you're wondering what would be of benefit to you in the health promotion, wellness sector, it might be that, branching out into the School of Public Health is a consideration for you. The other thing I would say is, yeah, the business side and the marketing side, those infrastructure and marketing is absolutely paramount. PT schools not they don't teach us anything about those. Maybe a little bit now, but not 20, 25 years ago. So I think that my charge to the profession and anyone who's listening would be that PT education must change. We're not evolving, I think, quick enough to become the kind of frontline healthcare workers that is absolutely necessary if we want this profession to continue and to grow and to evolve. Um, so many people, and I know so many wonderful, people who are teaching, professors, all the way, to adjunct and in between, who understand that the curricula there, it's absolutely packed. You can't even take this index card and wedge a single like lecture in, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. Right.
Like all the classes are set and there's no room for anything else. But is it really preparing? Is the PT curriculum like we have set that's so super packed that you can't get the index card of a course or lecture in there? Is that really direction we need to be going? Because if we
Mhm.
look at other professions, just take chiropractic, for example, look at the growth in their profession, the membership in their state and national associations. is overwhelming compared to ours, which can be like a paltry 22%. That's not a lot of professional involvement and support of our professional organizations that would help propel us into the future. So, that would be my charge. PT education has to change. We all need to be involved with our, professional associations and trying to change from within. Originally, I thought I could change from the outside in, but that rarely happens, right? You've got to get in there and get your hands dirty and sometimes be involved in a system that's broken in order to change it. Instead of thinking that we can push change from the bottom up or the top down, from the outside in like that.
Cool. So
that was a long-winded answer. So
no, sorry. It was great. I really appreciate the conversation. Are there any other thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we wind it down?
Again, if you're listening and you have a really strong desire to go in a direction that, maybe your colleagues or the profession isn't going right now, and you feel in your heart that it will help you connect with other people to help them heal, to guide them towards healing and recovering, their quality of life, then you're absolutely on the right path. And don't let anybody tell you that you can't. I think that, was it Mark Twain that said, don't allow people to belittle or marginalize your dreams or your blueprints, your imagination, because small people will always do that, but great people will always make you feel like you can be great too. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't. And if they do, as in Sturdy's case, as in my case, most of the time that's going to happen. They're going to tell you can't. Then you know what? Seek out a mentor, whomever that might be. Maybe you, it does not necessarily us talking to you right now, but find a mentor that can help you find the confidence and the courage and the concrete skill set to accomplish what you need. PTs have a giant learning curve to undergo really as a profession in order to really help folks understand the root cause of our issues, whether it's in running our business or whether it's in our own self-care and healthcare. So I would just encourage you and just, let you know that you can. If I can do it with all that quagmire of stuff and being a female, which is always harder, then you can do it too.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Garner. Appreciate the conversation. Really appreciate your insights. Thanks for sharing and being here today.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's been kind of soul stirring, to talk about my story. You don't always sit down and give yourself that much time to think about it. So yeah. I'd encourage everybody to do that, circle back, revisit your heart story.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.